Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, there is never too much to say about woke, fortunately, for my guest this week, Dr. Joanna Williams. She's the author of How Woke Won. It's just come out. It's in bookshops now, and you can get it as well on Amazon. This is about the most thorough book that I've seen on the subject. Thanks very much for coming in, Joanna. I must start, maybe a bit of a harsh question. How woke won? So is it game over?
It's a harsh question, but it's a fair question and a very, very good question to kick off with, because it's the number one thing I've worried about ever since I hit send on the final draft of the book. I've worried, well, maybe I've called all of this wrong. And you see things have happened like Elon Musk's potential takeover of Twitter, or even Ricky Gervais's new Netflix special. And you think, well, perhaps I've got this wrong. The pessimist in me, though, thinks I am right. I don't think these things that are pushing back against woke are significant enough just yet. When I say that woke has won, I don't mean it's won for all time. I certainly think there's potential for us to push back and for us to change things. But I guess what I mean when I say woke has won is that woke people, woke ideas, more to the point, have become the dominant way of thinking within our major institutions. So I would say particularly within the education sector, within even nurseries, schools, universities, woke ideas are really dominant, but also within the civil service, the police, the health service, every institution that helps run our society, particularly the media, the BBC, is really imbued with woke ideas. So I guess by saying how woke won, it's a bit of a stark pointer that for us just to recognise that fact. And I think we need to recognise that so that we've got an accurate assessment of where we are, so that we can then push back more successfully.
I would absolutely agree with you. You know, when people say, oh, I feel the tide is turning, you hear this quite a lot. I don't actually see that at the moment. Obviously, nothing stays the same, it will. What do you think, what would you say, Joanna? Are we talking a generational thing here? I mean, when will things maybe start? Well, I don't just mean balance out, but actually when will these ideas be seriously challenged, do you think?
Well, I think there definitely is a generational impact here, and I do blame the education sector for that in a way, because I think we have got a cohort of young people growing up now who've been so imbued with woke ideas through their schooling that they don't even see it as being political. They think that the fact that gender is fluid or multiple, the fact that you should see people's skin colour, they think that this is just a common sense starting point. They don't even see that as being a particular political position. So I do worry that the next generation coming up will be thoroughly woke. But having said that, I think things can change quite quickly. I mean, if somebody had said to me even 10 years ago that Britain would no longer be in the EU, I'd be very, very surprised at that fact. So it seems to me that if you do just have a few individuals even who can push and shape a conversation, and you get some democratic momentum behind that, the power of people to change things in the ballot box is absolutely phenomenal, and when that's put into effect, things really can change quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I've that example of Brexit, I think I've used myself, but it's an extremely pertinent one. You would have been considered a nut job in 2000, 20 years ago maybe, if you said we actually would leave the EU. The actual term woke, which we use all the time on this channel, and I know obviously it's your bread and butter at the moment, because obviously you are an academic, and I must say as well a much published author of other books. When you use the term woke, I suppose that for many people, at least I sort of see it as a kind of bastard child of political correctness, and everyone knew what that was, but still a lot of people, wouldn't you say, what is this woke thing?
Yeah.
What is it? Would you say that's true?
I think not only do I think that's true, but I also think that's quite deliberate. Yeah. I think it's something which does defy a very clear definition. And I think the people who are most woke kind of like it that way. It suits them not to have this label applied to them. And that's another way, if you like, another reason why I did put this word into the title of my book, because I kind of think you have to own the fact that you've got this set of ideas. You've got to own the fact that you do think this way, and you can't deny it. And actually the label woke then becomes quite useful for us in being able to pinpoint this is a particular set of ideas, this is a particular outlook on the world. And, I think extreme form of political correctness is one way of looking at it. But to me, it's a set of ideas, particularly around key issues like race and gender and identity. And it demands that we divide people up into identity groups and then arrange them into kind of hierarchies of privilege and act in relation to everyone we see accordingly. We judge everybody by their gender, their sexuality, their skin colour. We rank them. And to me, that's a really ugly and horrible thing to have to do. But that's what woke demands. Now, people who are woke, they tend to be quite, if not defensive, they tend to just say, we're just going completely over the top. All it means is just being aware of inequalities and hoping for social justice. But I think that's a bit disingenuous.
You call it gaslighting, don't you?
Yeah. I'm being polite if I say it's a bit disingenuous. I think it's absolute rubbish because it doesn't just mean this, just being aware of injustices. It tells us to act in response to injustices in a very particular way. So like say you could look at the earlier civil rights movement, you could look at the suffragettes, if you want to go back far enough, as being campaigns for equality. But they were campaigns which weren't about actually the opposite, really, it seems to me. So we can get into the criticisms of what's wrong with this, but it's that very kind of authoritarian insistence that not only must we be aware of racial inequalities, but we must respond to them in a very particular way that's set down by kind of woke thinking.
Also, there's this element of blame that, which is crucial. It seems to me that we can't just recognise social injustice. We are to blame for it. In our case, by virtue of being white, say, for example, that, and the way that they use the language is to actually make it even worse. If you deny this, then this is actual proof, isn't it? Like Alice in Wonderland. This is actual proof that you are part of the problem. I mean, when did you actually you personally hear the term woke? Do you remember?
I don't. I guess it was probably around 4 or 5 years ago, particularly with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I know at that point, if you go back to maybe 2017, 2018, it was a term, woke was a term that people were quite proud to be associated with. So I guess, now you've asked me that question, I think the first time I would have come across it would have been in some of these online kind of listicle type things that you have, the 10 kind of hot men and why being woke makes them more sexy, this kind of thing, why woke is cool. And they were very kind of didactic, almost lists of these are the correct views that you must hold. And these are 10 people who hold these views and why we love them. So it's the kind of teen Vogue kind of thing. But you'd also see at that time kind of Jack Dorsey, then CEO of Twitter, wearing a T-shirt on stage, kind of how he was proud to be woke. And it was a term that people were really quite pleased off the back of Black Lives Matter to be associated with. And it was only then when people started to, people who were criticising them began to use that term, that you suddenly got this kind of rejection of the label, this gaslighting, that they'd never said they were woke to begin with. And it's kind of become a political football since that point.
I mean, I think with it's like you made the point, I think, with political correctness, it's one of those things, you never came across somebody who said, I love being politically correct. It was always, I don't mean to be politically correct or whatever. You never hear it. I think I've heard one person use it unironically, and that was on Question Time, actually, a while ago. I can't remember quite who it was. I think it might have been a comedian, but he was genuinely surprised to be criticised for being called woke. And I thought, well, that tells you a lot about the people that you're mixing with. You've mentioned it there, but there's a subtitle in your book, The Elitist Movement That Threatens Democracy, Tolerance and Reason. Elitist. This is the thing, isn't it? That basically this seems to be very much the code of the privileged.
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's another reason, if you like, for the title, to actually point out to them that they have won, that they are a kind of new elite. Nowadays, I think we've had a complete transformation in who is in a position of power in this country and what the powerful actually believe in. And I mean, I make this point in the book, but I think it's a really important point that the people who are most woke are the people who are most likely to deny that they're woke, but also the people who are most likely to deny that they're powerful. They kind of exploit the victim status, I think, of genuinely disadvantaged people, and they appropriate that victimhood and try and say that they are victims themselves. So I'm on about, your Guardian journalists, your BBC hacks. If you look at, say, the way the women at the BBC, I'm on about the female presenters who earn huge salaries, are able to use the gender pay gap to argue for yet more money for themselves, whereas the women at the BBC who really earn very little money are the cleaners, the caretakers, the makeup people, the people behind the scenes, and nobody's really arguing for more money for them. But these top women are able to exploit the disadvantages, the genuine disadvantages of some. So, oh look, there's this terrible sexism, or you've got people of colour who are in very powerful positions who are able to say, oh look, there's this terrible racism. We can point to these racial disparities, which sure enough do exist, but they can say, look, these racial disparities show that we are disadvantaged too. Whereas these are people who've been kind of privately educated, top universities, really powerful positions of influence, earning stacks of money, and yet are able to present themselves as somehow this victimised minority. And I think woke kind of allows them to do that, and it allows them to deny that they are in very powerful positions.
Have you yourself ever been, let's say, a victim of woke? Amongst your colleagues and friends, have you lost any friends or whatever by the position you take on this?
Yeah, I guess I probably have, but realistically, I probably lost those friends quite a few years ago. But I know there are lots of people who I know who I am. I guess family members, I suppose, more than.
The reason I asked, by the way, I don't mean to be personal.
No,
I think it's interesting because anyone who was involved in Brexit, and indeed in some ways with the pandemic after that, this was a fact of life for them.
Oh, definitely. And I think people who really know what I think are probably self-select and just don't be my friend to begin with. But family who have no choice in the matter, I think they'd probably rather I just kept quiet. It's always like, it's all very well, you can think those different things if you want to, if you're a bit odd, but could you not just not say them?
The thing is, so this is the point, isn't it? You say it's a bit odd, but I don't know or presume to know anything about your particular social circle, but you're on the side of the angels. You're on the side of the majority of people. This is because the point is made here. That this is a minority of people with extraordinary influence, really. But then I was wondering when I thought about that, Joanna, is it such a small minority? Because when you look at these polls of young people coming out of college now and school, not only on the actual issues do they agree with what would be considered woke, but they also, for example, don't believe in free speech particularly. I find it so worrying. You mentioned the political aspect in schools a minute ago, and I think this is truly worrying. This is when it stops being just, if you like, a small group of highly influential academics or something.
No, I think you can divide the population up a little bit, and I think there are a small, and I would say genuinely small group of people who really buy into these woke ideas, who are absolutely at the forefront of pushing them forward, and I think actually really do know what they're doing and know the power that they've got and know how they can influence and change society. Then I think you've got other groups who kind of follow in their wake, some of whom have just never really thought critically about these things, have never been questioned, have never had it put to them that these views are actually, well, a view, like I say, not just the only way of looking at society. And I think that particularly about younger people nowadays. I think there's also a group of people who recognise what's going on, recognise that particular woke ideas are being pushed through, and are a bit too cowardly, or just think, you know, I'd rather just have a quiet life. I do not want to speak out and challenge this. And when I say cowardly, you know, in some ways that sounds very harsh. And I think some people deserve that label. You know, some people are cowardly, know what's going on, are able to stand up to this, but choose not to, because maybe they like the social approval on Twitter or something like that. But I guess the people I feel a little bit sorry for are some of the people who, you know, have just got families, work's maybe not the most important thing in their life. They're told you have to start wearing a pronoun badge now. Deep down, they're a bit critical. They'd rather not wear a pronoun badge. I'm on about people who are working, say, behind the counter in a bank, for example. They're like, why should I have to wear a pronoun badge? They don't want to. But then they think if I kick up a huge fuss about this, I could lose my job. Actually, I'd rather just get the salary, get home, see my kids, forget all about work once I get home. And I feel really sorry for those people because they're being pushed into doing something that they don't agree with. And I can understand why they just want a quiet life. And it's really unfair that we're making people kind of have to own political views that they don't actually buy into. It becomes a form of compelled speech.
Yes. I think a very good example of what you just said would be the recent example of the girl who was hounded out of her school. I mean, this is a case where you might remember she took issue, or she argued with someone who was giving a talk about gender. And I think she argued in favour of biological sex. But what happened afterwards is that about 60 of her peer group, classmates, whatever, started to bully her quite badly. The teachers started off by defending her and then backed off and then stopped defending her. Now, I mean, to me, there are so many appalling parts of that story. But that's cowardice, surely.
It is. It absolutely is cowardice. I mean, it's morally reprehensible how those teachers can go to bed at night and actually sleep easy. I don't know, because I was a teacher at the start of my career, and bullying was a really big deal. And we were clear that as teachers, our role was to stamp out bullying. I actually think a bit too much was made of that, and we were kind of ended up spending all our time, far too much time, I think, sorting out who said what to who during a playtime, rather than actually getting on and teaching the kids stuff. But to me, this is as clear an example of bullying as it comes. 60 pupils surrounding one girl for having asked a difficult question. You know, this is really outrageous. And you're absolutely right, rather than siding with the victim in this, and again, it's another word which I think gets thrown around far too much nowadays, but I think if you're surrounded by 60 fellows, then you clearly are the victim in that situation. Rather than siding with the victim, she got blamed. She was the one who was told to go and have to isolate in the library. She was the one who told she had to stop asking awkward questions. Now, that's completely morally reprehensible. The only way I can begin to make sense of what happened there, you know, rather than just completely hating on the teachers, which I am very tempted to do, is to look at how woke has completely twisted around the language that we use. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody's heard the phrase silence is violence nowadays, or words are violence, silence is violence. It's like everything is violence other than actually punching someone nowadays, which is perfectly legitimate, it seems, in some circumstances. And the word harm as well. and kind of emotional harm has become completely redefined, so that it was almost as if the people who were considered to be at risk of harm in that situation were the 60 girls who'd had their views challenged, people who were questioning their gender identity, even though they could have been one of the mob of 60 surrounding this girl. They, in this twisted, warped morality of woke, those 60 came to somehow be seen as the victims. And that's what's so bad about this. So for all I'm taking the moral high ground and saying I don't know how those teachers could sleep at night, I think unfortunately they could probably sleep very well, because a lot of them will no doubt think they've done the morally right thing. They've protected the disadvantaged people here, which in their twisted imaginations will be the transgender pupils, or the pupils who might be transgender at some point in the future.
You go through all the different aspects, whether it be what we used to call culture wars, in a way that I think it's slightly moved on from that, all the way through the institutions, free speech. And there is a chapter about politicization of children in schools. It seems to me that that is the most worrying thing of all. I mean, we've had an example of it there. But how on earth would one go about stopping that? I mean, how is it? What does it mean? Taking on the teaching unions? What does it mean?
Well, I think taking on the teaching unions, definitely, but more fundamentally, I think getting back to what's the purpose of a school, what are schools for? Because to me, schools should be have only one purpose, which is education. And I think what's happened over the course of a long period of time, I mean, we're probably talking almost 100 years, really, but gradually, over this very, very long period of time, schools have taken on much more of a socialisation role for young people. And they've edged out the parents in some ways, and bringing up a child nowadays is seen as being an intrinsic part of the teacher's job rather than the sole responsibility of the parents. Almost to the point, my children are old now, but when my children were young, almost to the point where I thought it had flipped completely full circle. So I was in the bizarre position of teaching my children when they were young how to read, how to add up. These things would come home from school, the books and maths homework and things like that. And I didn't object to that, but I thought the role of homework, naively, was to reinforce things that children had already learnt at school, whereas what I was being expected to do as a parent was to actually teach these things for the first time, it seemed. Meanwhile, I was packing my children off to school where they were learning about fair trade, and they were learning about the need to protect the environment, and they were getting what I thought was the morality and the values that I should have been instilling in them as a parent. And I think this is the fundamental problem that we've got in our education system, that education, if it happens at all, is kind of the lowest priority above and beyond socialising children. So when you look then as a teacher at how do you go about socialising children, if this is your responsibility, you're looking for a set of moral values that you can impart. And this then goes into every aspect of what you do, and it actually even infiltrates into the subject teaching. Do
you have any struck with the idea that one way around this would be homeschooling?
It could be, but I have to say, I mean, I'm slightly sceptical. I mean, that's been put to me a lot, particularly by people in America, are very big. And some,
they're doing it more there, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think there's a much more long-standing tradition of it than in the UK. But I mean, I'm reluctant, and obviously it wasn't something that I've got 3 children, and it wasn't something I did with my own 3 children. I think it puts a great deal of pressure on parents, I know just during the experience of the pandemic, that sense of having to be everything to my child, who was still at home at that point, to be kind of teacher and friend and mother. I mean, I guess at heart, I do think that the roles of mother and teacher are fundamentally different roles. The teacher should be an authoritative figure. Well, I think the mother should as well. But essentially, I think the mother's job is to love the child and to nurture the child and to instill morality and values. Whereas I think the teacher's job is to instruct, to instill discipline and to be a subject specialist.
Yes. You know, this has happened with my own niece recently. You know, she's got little kids. I think the oldest is 8. And there are these workshops starting up. They were going to start up this year about gender and race, I think. And she just wrote a letter saying, you know, of course we are people who accept diversity and all of it, but I don't feel comfortable about children this young being exposed. And she got quite short shrift about it. And in fact, she's totally powerless, really, isn't she, in this situation?
No, completely. I think the interesting thing as well is as I was saying earlier, you know, how this actually even comes to replace subject knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, this is a really silly example. My daughter's doing her GCSEs at the moment, and she told me one of the questions on the GCSE biology paper, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've no reason to assume she was lying to me, gave the nutritional content of a veggie burger and a beef burger, and the question was, which was the best one? And I said to her, how would you even begin to answer that question? Because how do you define best in that content? If you're starving, then the best one's going to be the one that's got the most calories in it. It could be the best one that's got the most protein in it. I mean, my instinct is they were expected to say that the veggie burger was the best one, but that's a moral judgment. You know, that's not an educational, biological question. And I mean, if it'd been told, you know, this is the person's nutritional profile, or you know, this person's lacking in this particular nutrient, which would be the best burger for them to eat, it would be a scientific question. But just saying which is best, that's a moral question.
You've obviously you had a great career, academic career, writing and journalism, and you also were associate at Spike, is that right? Associate editor at Spike. Politically, where would you put yourself now, do you think?
Yeah.
If anywhere. I mean, increasingly people feel homeless.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, full confession. I'm a member of the SDP.
Oh, right.
So
that's our cameraman.
Well, there you go. So that's, I guess, is where my political allegiances are. Over the course of my adulthood, I voted for every political party going. And I find it I probably find that the most difficult question to answer. However people label me, I tend to object to it and say, no, I'm not that. Whenever I've applied a label to myself, I've turned around and I found a few years later that kind of the world's moved on, and this label, say humanist, for example, or even libertarian, I then kind of feel a bit comfortable with that label for a short period of time, but then politics seems to move on so quickly and the outside world seems to move on so quickly, and suddenly I discovered that what I thought I meant by, say, being a libertarian no longer seems to have that same meaning in the outside world. Would you
be very active with the SDP? I mean, would you stand for them?
No. I mean, I do go to meetings. I live in Canterbury, and we have monthly meetings, and I do attend those meetings. I guess my reasons for not standing are, I think it was Tony Benn who said when he was leaving Parliament, you know, I want to leave Parliament so I can concentrate on politics. I've probably completely bastardised that quote, but I think there's something like that. I would worry that, and because it is something I've thought about, but I would worry that two things, I mean, they'll probably just say more about me really than politics, but I would worry I don't have there's a kind of contrarian instinct in me that would find it very difficult to toe a party line on anything. As soon as somebody said to me, this is the party line, this is what we must say, I think that the kind of devil in me would want to argue the exact opposite.
Very fair point. If you've been in the fields that you have, I mean, when I had a foray into politics for 5 years, I mean, you know, you also find that you are expected to have a view on virtually everything. And we don't have views on certain things.
No, that's true.
But the reason I ask is because the main parties simply do not take what you've just written about seriously. I don't care what they say.
No.
I think a lot of them just simply don't understand it. Or actually, no, I'm completely going to contradict myself there. The Labour Party seems to have taken it on board entirely, but they won't present it that way, you know. So in an electoral sense, there's almost nowhere for people to turn to, really, is there?
No, I think you're right. And I think the Conservative Party as well, they make some kind of stands every so often to appear to be pushing back against woke, particularly in schools, for example. And I think that's good. You know, I definitely welcome that. But at the same time, I don't think we can trust them or rely on them. And I think, like you say, it's almost as if it's a kind of sop to what people want. Yeah. And it's almost as if you can throw those crumbs out there in order to carry on pursuing what they think is the main agenda. And I think some of them as well seem to genuinely believe that in order to win the next generation, they're aware that something is happening generationally. And you look at the kind of the Carrie Johnson wing of the Conservative Party, for example, I think they're much more inclined to think that you have to be woke yourself in order, or appear to be woke in order to win over young voters, which I don't think is true. I think young people can cope with being challenged and being questioned on what they think.
What do you think is at the basis of woke? I mean, we all have been talking about it for the past 25 minutes, but would you say it's like cultural Marxism? Would you say that the actual result of the point of this is to basically be revolutionary in the end? Or is it just about maintaining a kind of your elite status? What do you think is the reasoning behind it?
So, good question. If I was going to answer in 2 words, I think what's behind it is contempt, and where it's going is authoritarianism. Really? And I know those are 2 very dramatic words, so I'll kind of explain them a little bit. But I think what drives woke, and as you pointed out on the subtitle, I do think this is an elite idea and an elite way of thinking. I think what drives it is contempt for the working class. And I think it comes from a left-wing, or it appears to be left-wing. I wouldn't use the phrase you use, cultural Marxism, but I can see why people do. And it appears to kind of come from the left wing, but it's actually a reaction against many left-wing positions from several decades ago that were grounded in a sense of the working class as a positive force for change, for example, grounded in a sense of working class agency. That's flipped on the left, and it seems to me that a lot of left-wing people nowadays look at the working class with complete and utter contempt. You know, these are people who, if it wasn't for sugar taxes, would become obese. If it wasn't for, in Scotland and Wales, smacking bans would abuse their children. You know, these are people who don't know what's best for themselves, need us to control and monitor every area of their lives. These are people who, without our elite input, are racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic. We can't trust them with politics, so we've got to get decision-making parcelled out to the EU, was what the left wanted and still wants. You know, so these people are not allowed to have any decision, any agency over their own lives, any impact over the direction of the country. So I think it's contempt that drives woke thought. You know, we need to impose our ideas around challenging racism, challenging homophobia, gender. I mean, you know, completely wacky ideas about gender being a feeling rather than having any grounding in biological sex. We've got to impose these ideas on people, almost just as a moral stance to show that we are right and they are wrong.
I think, you know, I completely agree with you there. This came up during Brexit, and in this country, you saw a kind of blatant snobbery, which I took me back, actually. I mean, I thought, once upon a time, people would even have covered it up, you know, a bit. Whereas now it was who are these awful people? And I think that was why there was this extraordinary kind of, and still is, bitterness. They can't believe that they have been gainsaid.
No, absolutely.
They just can't get over it.
No, and you see it all the time. I mean, it was even just last weekend, Jamie Oliver outside 10 Downing Street, holding up his Eton mess trifle, you know, absolutely horrified that the government is not going to ban buy one, get one free deals in supermarkets. And I mean, I wrote about this on Spike this week. I was saying it looks as if he's having a pop at the Tories. It looks as if he's got an angry protest outside Downing Street. But really, his problem's not with the Tories at all. He just wants them a bit more in line doing what he says. His problem is with these plebs who, you know, will go around and buy cheap food and feed their kids cheap food. You know, these disgusting hordes, these masses, they need controlling, they need reining in, they need to be force-fed carrot sticks and cucumbers, because if we just let them choose for themselves, who knows what they'll get up to. They need saving from themselves. It's a very curious thing, kind of pity and contempt. I think they go hand in hand, two sides of a coin. You know, he presents himself as being kind of caring and just pitying these poor people, but it's very contemptuous.
It's interesting, you know, if you look back to the time of the Bloomsbury Group, going way back 100 years, obviously far less influential than what we've got now, but their kind of snobbery bordering on fear, actually, of the masses. If you read Virginia Woolf, and we're about to have the Jubilee, she was talking about, I think it was George V's coronation or something, and she said these people sort of with their ugly clothes and their ugly, you know, coming over, you know, just utter sort of contempt, you know. I mean, it's extraordinary. I don't want to give away everything in the book, which you must get. It's great. But if we go back, you know, to this central issue of what can people do? What do you think? I mean, people have got to stand up. What does that actually mean, do you think, then, Joanna?
I mean, I think the number one place to stand up is the ballot box, which obviously does beg the question, and, you know, goes back. I feel a bit ashamed and embarrassed because I know that then takes you back. You need the people to stand for Parliament who are going to challenge these views, and then obviously it raises the question, I should put myself forward. But I think speaking out is in a way the only thing we can do, and it's as soon as one person sticks their head above the parapet, it gives other people confidence to say that that's what they think too. So completely silly example, just as I was walking here, like I say, I live in Canterbury, walking down to the train station 11 o'clock this morning, a neighbour who I very rarely see, you know, met her every so often, stuck her head round, oh, hello, Joanna, hello. She said, I watched you on GB News. She said, I really agree with you, you know, so lovely to see you. It's brilliant, that channel. Now, I had no idea that she would have kind of watched GB News, and it was so heartwarming to hear her say that. But you feel like you've got this kind of little conspiracy going then, almost. And I think clearly if she hadn't seen me on GB News, she wouldn't have maybe felt empowered to say, you know, I agree with you. And I think it does just take people to be a little bit braver, more people to be a little bit braver, to stick their heads above the parapet and to push back. And, you know, you start a momentum, you start a conversation where there wasn't a conversation. And like I said, I do appreciate this is not as easy for everyone, and there's a reality of having to go to work, pay the bills, you know, people have got busy lives. But I think any opportunity you get just to even just ask a question, you know, just be the person who is going to ask a question. When you look at kind of online forms that you have to fill in, even just to join onto your kind of Skype chats or these kind of things nowadays, often it gives you a drop-down box to include your pronouns. And when you see that, you think, oh, I must have to do this. But actually you don't. You can just bypass this. And often you find when you do just bypass it, it then does leave other people feeling that they can bypass these things as well.
Yes, and I think, you know, your point as well about just the small things, even when people come out with sort of words like problematic, you can sort of laugh or oh, problematic, you know, just to try to diffuse it slightly, you know, because it's a tough one. But the thing is, as you say, people have got to stand up, and more and more people are, I think. But
definitely.
Certainly you, Anna. The book is called How Woke Won. Thank you so much, Joanna. Will you stay,
pleasure.
because we have some questions, a few questions for our exclusive members to answer. But in the meantime, thank you very much. And we shall see you next time on So What You're Saying Is. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.